Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today at the GE Vernova Prophecy 2025 User Conference. Today's presentation is Leveraging Cloud to Accelerate Digital Transformation, and we're going to have a focus on historian and visualization. We hope that you're having a great User Conference 2025, and thank you for joining us for this on-demand session. My name is Nick Gigantis, and I lead our Prophecy partnership with AWS. Today on the call, we also have Brian Johnson, our product manager for Prophecy Historian and Prophecy Data Hub, and Gabriel Verreau, partner solution architects from AWS. Today, we really want to cover three important objectives. One, we want to give you an overview of our cloud historian and visualization tools so you can understand how customers are deriving value from these tools today to solve their business challenges. Two, we want to talk about how manufacturers are really starting to leverage these cloud solutions to drive KPIs. And lastly, we're going to talk about some considerations that you should take into account when doing the cloud migration and how you can do it in a way that it really delivers value for your organization. During the user conference, you heard a lot about our prophecy strategy. And one of the things we are zeroing in on with this presentation is really our cloud transformation. So our entire portfolio is really being re-architected in a manner that it makes it available in a way that you can leverage the scale, speed, security of cloud in order to use these solutions. And so Historian is a great example of that. You're going to hear that throughout the user conference as well around the other prophecy tools that are moving to the cloud. So today's presentation really is specifically focused on our cloud transformation pillar of our strategy. And thanks to AWS here today for co-presenting this presentation with us. So with that, let me go ahead and turn it over to Brian as our first speaker.
Awesome. Thanks, Nick. Hi, everybody. I'm Brian Johnson. Like Nick said, I'm the PM here for Historian Cloud, and a new product that we're introducing at the end of the year called Data Hub. So you'll be seeing more about that as we go through the conference as well. Hopefully, you've already attended my session there. So you can see here we have our standard safe harbor statement. We may be talking about future-looking features in the product or other information that may not be incredibly public at this point in time. So if I give away any secrets, don't tell anybody. Next slide, please. All right. So when we think about what does it mean to have a cloud-based solution, I think more and more of us are becoming more and more familiar every day as more and more customers, and probably yourselves included, are looking at Industry 4.0. How do we leverage more? How do we get more out of what we're doing? And cloud is a way to do that, right? For many of us, we'll have been a standard on-prem Historian customer for quite some time now. And I think the next evolution of that is to either leverage a hybrid cloud or to move fully to cloud, right? And we have all the tools to make that happen within the Prophecy portfolio. But why would you want to do that is the question, right? And an increase in delivery of value is really what we're talking about. So you can see, moving on a metric from data capture to execution, right? How do we make that work faster? How do we give you more throughput as a customer of Historian? What options do we give you then to derive information from the data that you're storing, right? Because Historian is really great at storing a lot of information, very high speed, for a very long time, and getting it to the places where it needs to be for analysis and evaluation to derive insight from the data. But when you think about that process, if we look across the bottom of the slide here, you can see data not captured, data not streamed, data not accessible, right? Those are problems of what I will call a bygone era at this point, right? As we talk about a cloud solution, it's a solution to save yourself from all of that trouble, right? Data not analyzed, data not communicated. These are things that the cloud is able to help us with because it democratizes the data and it gives us a footprint that is immediately global. So anybody with an internet connection, when you're leveraging a cloud-based solution, has access to the data. And we have examples of that with Historian today, where multinational customers are able to leverage that for analytics across their enterprise system and not just on each factory floor independently. So it's really cool to think about, we can solve these problems that we've had for quite some time, leveraging what is not at this point necessarily a new technology in the cloud, and leveraging AWS as a partner, right? They have all the tools necessary to get us to a point where we're able to get to execution, we're able to use the data for decision making, and it's much better throughput and much more value than we've ever been able to create before with Historian data using cloud infrastructure and cloud resources, which is really, really exceptional, I think. And we have customers today that are seeing great cost savings and great throughput in terms of what they can do with the data because they're leveraging a cloud system. So awesome. Next slide, please, Nick. Awesome. So you may say, okay, Brian, that first explanation, you've caught our attention. Where do we go from here, right? And as we talk about increasing digitization, digital transformation is a phenomenon that's not going away. In fact, it's increasing, right? We've seen cloud technology come about. We've seen now AI and ML technology come about. And to get the best of both of those places, you need to digitize. It's no longer acceptable as a modern institution to have simply Excel files or paper-based auditing, paper-based the data collection. It's hard to do. It really locks you into a corner and doesn't let you get the best value from your data. So you can see on the left-hand side of the slide here, the connect, collect, store, all of these things are really where Historian excels, right? And we can double click into this and say, Historian on the cloud is doubly good at all of these features, right? Connection, yes. If you have a data connection, you're able to leverage that. We talk about being able to leverage Operations Hub, our visualization software from a watch even. If you have a connected device, you're able to start to bring the data there. And furthermore, you may be saying, well, I'm not super sold on this cloud idea. Where does the data go? But many of us are using a cloud-based solution today. If you're using Apple Mail or Gmail or any function like that, or even Microsoft 365, those are all cloud-based solutions that we probably use on an everyday basis that we may not think about. So it's making sure that we're able to connect, collect the data, store the data. And when we think about storage on the cloud, this is where we get into an interesting paradigm because we no longer have to provision the hardware ourselves. We have full control over how does that work, but we're no longer placing a purchase order and waiting for these things to come in and then having to do the connection and having to have that problem of folks getting a phone call at 2 a.m. on a Saturday because a drive went bad and now data is being lost, right? When we move our data to the cloud, these companies that are providing the infrastructure take over all of that responsibility for you. It's really a very exciting time to think about, where else can we focus on a core competency instead of having to go through the staffing or data collection and making sure that we have all of that. We can then focus on the other side of the circle, which is, monitor, analyze, predict, optimize, and then we've come full circle. When you think about where can we go when we just have access to the data and we can think about how to optimize it, it gives us so much more throughput to think, okay, we're now able to analyze the data using new and different tools. We can now optimize the data. If you think about Prophecy CSense or any other AI ML tool on the market, right? Because you're able to have really high-speed data that's collected very efficiently, that's stored very efficiently in a massive way on the cloud, you can drive much better prediction. You can drive much better optimization. It's really very exciting to think, as we get further and further into an AI-driven world, what can we train a model to do? If we're able to bring different data sources together, especially using cloud, and with Historian, we have our Parquet export to make sure that you're able to get your data from inside of Historian and your archive files out into a wider world of data lakes or data lake houses. And at that point, you're able to optimize because you have a multifaceted approach to the data analysis. You can empower your data teams or just frontline workers, right? It goes up and down the line of from the factory floor to the C-suite. Folks can optimize and they're able to then understand what the data is telling them for their each individual role. And it's much easier than it's ever been if you're utilizing a cloud technology, right? No longer do we have to send files back and forth or have meetings to make sure that everybody understands what's there. We can, in today's day and age where we're all working remote still, or having folks that are distributed across the globe, it's much easier to have that sort of a distributed solution that you can then optimize. So I think it's a really exciting time. And then you can see across the bottom of this slide, Prophecy Historian provides high performance, enterprise-wide industrial data management. So it's important to think of no longer are we pigeonholed into single factories having information and maybe two factories in adjacent states in the US have different information. We can now have the same information across the portfolio or across your footprint and drive a unified approach to data management, which is really very cool. So next slide, please. Excellent. So we just talked about cross-site visibility and analysis, but let's dig into this and see what we're getting out of it, right? You may say, well, this is a cool thing, Brand. We've tried to do this for quite a while. How can you help us get there with Historian, right? Maybe you're a current user of Historian 7.2 or Historian 8.1, or even earlier today, I had a conversation with somebody who was using Historian 5.5. That's from a long time ago. The most recent versions of our Cloud Historian coming out in 2025, releasing quarterly this year, have so many more features and benefits than what we've seen before. Obviously, our cloud version came about in 2022, so it's been around for a few years now. It's gone through several updates. It's no longer, if you've experienced it in the past, it is no longer a software with an Achilles heel, I would say. We've made all the necessary improvements and investments. So now you're able to get that cross-site visibility and analysis on a tool, and you as a customer can decide where your data lives, right? Do you need to have a little bit of data on site because of regulatory requirements? You could push the rest of that data to the cloud, save a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of resources, because the cloud service, when you're using AWS and you have your account built out, your resources are essentially infinitely customizable to the point of, with the click of a button in a few moments, you can change the size of your compute instance, for example, right? But at the end of the day, the left hand of the side really covers what we're talking about when we say no more data gaps. There's no excuse anymore to have a gap in data, because if you're able to leverage a solution that goes across your enterprise, you can see the data coming from each place. And you can see sort of the diagram we have here, right? Collect, store, and normalize, distribute. These are the pieces of the puzzle that take the wheel we looked at in the last slide and bring it further, right? We've got plants 1, 2, and 3 in our diagram. Each of them has a historian, but wouldn't it be great if we had the ability to see the data that was contained in each of those historians in one single place, so we didn't have to do 3 times the work, 3 times the effort, the complication of making sure that maybe the data from Historian 1 and Historian 2 and Historian 3 get to the same place? I think we would love to have those analytics, right? That doesn't mean that each factory or site doesn't necessarily have their own analytics, but when we're thinking holistically across an enterprise, it's important to know that we can get all that data. You can see in the diagram, it flows across into a centralized historian up into the cloud diagram there. And what we're calling central would be sort of your C-suite. Maybe you're running a metric board that folks are looking at on a daily basis, or you're looking to know what's going on in each factory on an hourly basis because you're measuring throughput, right? Or you're taking the data from your other systems, whether it's Simplicity or iFix or Plant Apps, and you want to have all of that data available across the board so everybody can see what's going on, right? So Plant 1 or Site 1 can see what Site 2 is doing and can measure themselves against that. And then at the end of the day, you can look holistically across your operations and see who is the most efficient and why. Can we replicate those results? How do we push for that, right? Because then you have a more efficient operation. And because of the metrics and analysis that you're able to do, having that holistic view of your data, as it says on the left-hand side here, it allows for reliable and consistent data, right? Ready for visualization, reporting, and analysis. At the end, that's what we're really pushing for. So as a customer, if that's something that you're struggling with, cloud is definitely a great option to start to look at. And today we're deployed from the marketplace in AWS, and you're able to action the deployment yourself in about an hour. I've done it so many times that my engineers have asked me to stop doing it, but it's very quick and easy to do, right? And in the time it takes you to get a cup of coffee, you've deployed your historian. Then you add your collectors and you're off to the races to collect your data. But at the same time, you could keep some of your data on-prem and be able to move around that way. So it's really ultimately flexible to the needs of your operation to meet you where you are and to give you the flexibility you need to run your business on a day-to-day basis. It's really very cool. And then on top of that, coming in Q3 this year, we're adding a SaaS solution. So we'll totally remove the necessity for you to do any specification of hardware or build or analysis or architecture. We've done it all for you. We'll run it on our own GE-owned tenant on AWS, and we'll give you access through a URL to control your data. For folks that have seen our smart factory talking points, it's very much the same, but that's coming later this year. So I would love to have a conversation if anybody wants to reach out to me. Next slide, Nick. Awesome. So I talked about the sort of hybrid architecture, and this slide really shows what that's capable of. But what I want to call folks' attention to is the right side of the slide here underneath the green cloud-enabled capabilities, right? So you may be saying, okay, we have a hunger for these analytics. We have a desire to be able to move forward in our tech stack, to flatten our architecture, to make it much more simple. SaaS even sounds like a doable option for us because as an organization, we've been told by our CIO to go cloud first or hybrid cloud first. How do we get there? Okay, this is what the architecture would look like. But what are you really getting when you're leveraging our cloud solution with Historian? Zero downtime upgrades, right? How many of us have to plan for weeks or months or even a year to plan downtime to do a Historian upgrade? I know it's most of us because I can see what versions we're running. So that customer that talked to me earlier about Historian 5.5, I would love to make their life a little easier. And if they could leverage Cloud Historian or make the update to Cloud Historian 2025, they'd be able to get all of these capabilities, right? The zero downtime upgrade, always on availability. Like we talked about, if you have your smartphone in your pocket, you can access your cloud servers, which is really very cool. And then multi-site capability, right? This is the whole story of Historian on cloud. And you can see in this diagram even, Site 1 flows up to a central or enterprise historian, and that flows into the cloud, or you can take your data directly from the site floor, from the collectors next to the data source, and bring that data up into the cloud, which is really very cool. And then we have a feature coming later this year at the end of Q2 called scalability, which is many, many orders of magnitude greater data ingestion for Historian. Last I saw, we were somewhere around 600 million data points per minute. And that to me is really very incredible. Yeah, it's a huge development in terms of Historian. Nobody else on the market is going to have something similar to that. And if you need that high-speed data, if you're a grid operator or you're in specialty chemicals or other industries that really, really need that very millisecond data, we've removed your headroom at this point in time. So you're able to go as fast as you need to and bring all the data in, and you still get all the capability that a Historian will offer. So really great developments there. So this is the architecture that we would be looking at. Next slide, please, Nick. Okay, so I've mentioned Operations Hub. We've talked about metrics, but what does that mean? I look a lot at trends in industry or where are folks going or what are the issues that they're facing when it comes to data management or data governance. These are really hot button issues. But what you can see here is a screen from our Operations Hub software, which is low code, no code, very easy to use. Each of the metrics on this page were created by dragging and dropping a metric from a menu, connecting it to your Historian data source. So which tags do you want to run? And then you're able to go from there, right? I think we should not have to become front-end programmers to make metrics in the modern day and age. It's really important that we democratize the data. Using cloud, we're breaking down the silos, right? Different folks from different business units would be able to have access to this sort of a dashboard. It could be customized for each person's specific use. And, it can be as granular or as wide-ranging as it needs to be, depending on the audience. But the fact is, it's super easy to build. It doesn't necessitate any extra training on your behalf. It's very intuitive. And we work with these types of solutions. So this is the innate prophecy solution of Operations Hub, but Historian on the cloud interfaces with any other solution that is able to accept a REST API. So we have customers that are using TrendMiner. We have customers that are using Seek. We use any of the native AWS tools. So it's important to know that Historian is flexible enough to meet you where you need to be. And when using Cloud Historian or on-prem, but mostly Cloud Historian, we connect where we need to connect. And if you have tools that you're using today, you don't have to get rid of them. You can continue to use them. That goes for competitive historians as well, right? If you're using a Pi Historian, I wish you wouldn't, but if you've made that choice, we can add a Cloud Historian into your footprint as well. We have tools within the Historian suite to be able to move the data from a Pi Historian into a Prophecy Historian. And the beauty of it is it can be on-prem or in the cloud. But using the Cloud Historian, number one, you get to leverage the work that we've done across the Prophecy suite to make sure that everything works much more tightly together. And I mentioned that I'm also PM for a product called Data Hub. That's an upcoming solution for a data fabric and a data model and being able to move your data across the portfolio. And so it's an excellent time to come in and start to leverage our cloud offerings because they're only getting stronger and we're only building more capability into them as time goes forward. And so as a customer, you really come in and you get the best of what we're offering when you're using a cloud solution. So I think that's it. Awesome. And so after this, I'll hand it over to Gabriel and he can give the viewpoint from AWS. So you've heard me talk about why cloud is awesome, but now Gabriel can tell you why AWS is awesome. So
excellent. Yeah, thanks, Brian. Sure. And I think these are all, points that we hear all the time, and I'm hearing them, now at AWS and kind of my solutions architect role, but have been in the historian space for a long time as well in the past. And these are, new conversations, but old topics. I think everyone who's worked with historians, who's managed them, is aware of the challenges. And when things go well, they're great. But when things go wrong, or you need a little bit more agility to change things, it can become difficult. And some of the points I heard you mention around integration with like different systems, that's something that can be more and more difficult as the tooling is evolving very quickly. So when we have legacy historians on-prem, and we want to start integrating with newer like AI ML tools or advanced analytics, these integration points become really difficult. And then once you want to do these more advanced capabilities, well, that also means that maybe you need to access your data at scale. Maybe you want to look at all of your data that you're collecting for a number of years. Then the computational intensity of those workloads also has an impact, right? If you're on premises having to run these complex analytics, especially for historical data, like that require a lot more compute. So that may mean needing to migrate to new servers, right? That whole piece is something that takes a lot of time. And also it just takes a lot of people to manage this. So this is kind of what we mean when we talk about this inability to apply, right, more advanced analytics, is really the scale at which we want to do this, which could be streaming. And we'll talk about that, how the cloud can help on this piece, but for historical analysis as well. So Nick, you can move to the next slide. So the kind of value prop of running an historian in the cloud is not so dissimilar to other workloads that have been moved to the cloud in probably the last decade or so, right? We see today majority of things like ERP systems are in the cloud. For the historian, one of the piece that made it difficult to move to the cloud was that we want to make sure that it is secure and that we're able to collect the data. And the data is typically coming from SCADA systems, from the PLCs, right? In that piece, and I think Brian touched on that with the hybrid architecture, like those components will remain closer to the edge. So they are unlikely to be running in the cloud, but it doesn't mean that your historian piece cannot run in the cloud. And more our facilities are connected. And if we lose connectivity, yes, there's a lot of things built in with the historian to buffer the data and make things work, even if there's some interruption. But the level of interruptions we have are much less than it used to be, because so many systems that are already running your facilities are dependent on those connectivities, right? So we see factories that will have redundancy on that scale as well to connect to the cloud. So one of the big pieces, and I touched on that briefly earlier, is if we want to be able to make business decisions in real time, that means that we want to always have access to not only our historian data, but our historian data in context of everything else that's going on in our business, which could be other IT systems that are likely running in the cloud today. So by moving a lot of this together, it makes the integration much easier, but also it allows us to be very flexible and experiment, right? Because we have the scalability of the cloud, and we always think of the scalability as like it will grow bigger as you need more, but it's also the other way around, right? If you do an experiment with a team and you're experimenting on doing large scale analytics and turns out there's no real value, then you haven't invested in getting a whole new team trained, getting all the servers, right? You just shut down this project and that's it. So your level of flexibility in what you can try is much greater with these more flexible systems. Nick, you can switch slide. So obviously AWS is not the only place where cloud workloads can run. For AWS, the industrial market, that it's manufacturing, energy, utilities, right, has always been a core segment for us. And this really kind of started from our connection also with Amazon, right? A lot of automation within warehouses. We have a ton of automation, industrial engineers. So there's a tight connection, and we've been wanting to work with a lot of partners in the space, and this is where our partnership with GE also comes from, right? Of having very much solution focused industrial expertise. And as part of that, we're building a lot of kind of industrial purpose built systems that can work with the historian, right? How can we make things like anomaly detection, like forecasting easier? So we complement the core capabilities that exist in the GE historian with core capabilities that AWS will have around MLOps and analytics and storage at scale. The other piece that is always probably the first question, and sometimes even before the first question, is always security. And security is critical. We always say at Amazon, security is job zero, or there's nothing that we do where security doesn't come first. And that's really important for critical facilities, and that means pretty much anywhere that would run an historian, right? We want to ensure security on access to that data, from the access itself, from once the data is stored in the historian, how do we govern, right, who has access to this data? So that means when the historian is running, but also when we're taking backups, when we're doing analytics, right, building these governance model around who has right to this data, especially for facilities where sometimes you may be also sharing data with other partners or customers. So how can you do that in a secure way? So these are all things that is always our key focus in all of our implementation. And then finally, a big part of this is, the cloud is great when it works. And as part of the when it works is, we're investing on really a massive, massive global scale, right? We have more than 30 regions and some that are opening all the time to be able to, yes, you're in the cloud, but you can still be near where your users are accessing the data, or having multi-region strategy where even if an entire region were to go dark, you would still be able to access your data. And more, and we're seeing that more these years, there is a lot of regions that also want to have some specific data residency requirements, so that we're talking about in the US, or that it's in Europe or Saudi Arabia or China, right, wherever that may be, that have more strict data residency requirement. By having it in the cloud, we're still able to go through all of that, but still providing, right, that access and that scale. So Nick, we can switch slide. So, we've talked a lot on kind of the issues, let's say with the current state of historians, which are mainly on-prem. But what are we actually looking at, right? Why would we want to move to the cloud from a business perspective? A few of the things are also around, for example, if we start from the right, around cost, right? We talked about the flexibility, but the flexibility also means cost, right? The reason why we don't all have, entire racks of, NVIDIA GPUs to run AI workloads is because it's very expensive. And it's not only expensive for the hardware, but it's also expensive to have people maintain it. What happens when there's a fault? How do you upgrade all of this, right? So the whole piece of the pay as you go is very much bringing you flexibility, and it brings you agility, as I mentioned, of being able to experiment, being able to work with third parties that can leverage this data. And it really allows us to have a much more rapid innovation cycle, because you're able to experiment, and even if it fails, the investment is quite minimal. So once you're able to do this cycle rapidly, that means that sometimes you actually will succeed, and you'll be able to be at the cutting edge of your industry. And then finally, in terms of just pure functionality, right? Once you have your historian in the cloud, we talk about various integrations, and Brian mentioned, a few partners of GE's, but there's so many companies, and especially in the AI age that we're entering, that are popping up that are solving very, very specific use cases, right? And maybe a company is helping you on a very narrow use case that works for you, but by having it in the cloud, that integration is much more easy because they've likely built that integration, right? Versus needing to have one with a GE historian, one with an MES, one with this other system. So these kind of like data integration, export, import between systems becomes a big key. Okay, switch that. And when we talk about the cloud, it can be a lot. And there's been, a lot of, I think, of interest and changes in the last probably 5 years in the industrial sector of, hey, let's start looking at the cloud for also our OT workloads. But I think a big piece is to also be realistic in how this is done, right? You're unlikely going to rip everything you have and move everything to the cloud. So this is it's a journey, and the partnership that we've had with GE is really about meeting customers where they are, and this can mean kind of a few different approaches. And some people have been running historians in the cloud, kind of quote unquote, by simply having virtual machines in the cloud and installing on-prem historians, right? That's been happening for more than a decade now. Then we have moved to having a native cloud historian. So when GE released the cloud historian, right, this was something that was native but running in a customer account. So you're still handling the infrastructure. It is scalable. It is elastic, but you still manage that infrastructure. And then now we're working together on really that modernization piece of how can we move to a full SaaS model where, and maybe that means that only some of your facilities are on that model, right? But then you're moving to a model where you don't have to think about the infrastructure at all. You just have this historian as a service. So you still have your, collectors on-prem. You still have this kind of hybrid architecture, but you don't need to own and manage any of the infrastructure. So this was a lot of kind of minimization of costs, especially for elastic workloads, and not necessarily in like the hardware, but really in like the resources that you have, right? The number of like Prophecy admin or whatever that you have, they can be kind of put to develop applications on top of it to get value instead of just managing, right, the historian and making sure that things are running smoothly. You kind of give that off to a team that that's all they do. So a little bit easier to scale with that. I think we can switch slide. Excellent. So like I said, the part of meeting you where you are, right, is also your digital maturity. So things will go a little bit, it will be a progress. So you can start with the more localized, right, of how do we get real-time visibility, and Brian was talking about that, right, maybe from like your mobile devices, your tablet. How do we get good visibility, creating those KPIs, building initial integration with other systems. Then we move on to this enterprise-wide visibility, which is probably the main initial use case for the cloud historian, right? How can we bring all of our sites together to contextualize this data across our enterprise? And then we move on to predictive operations. Well, we're doing okay today. How can we improve our operations? So this means analyzing the data, running potentially some machine learning. Sometimes it could be easier analytics, right? It doesn't always have to be the most complex, but once you have that data, you're able to play around with this. And then finally is moving to this, more adaptive operations and kind of closed loop control of, hey, when I'm detecting a change and I'm going away from my ideal batch, right? Can I then start looping things back to my control system? So this whole piece of autonomous operation is kind of where eventually we end up wanting to go, right? To a more like lights off factory concept. So there's no need to start there, right? This is like I said, it's a journey, and you'll likely across your enterprise have some parts of all of those steps. But it's important to understand that, wherever you are, there's always, somewhere where you can go. And, there's people that can help you kind of guide you through that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much, Brian and Gabriel. That was an excellent overview of our Prophecy Historian and visualization capabilities. And if you're a customer that's watching this in advance of the Prophecy Accelerate user conference, we will be demoing Cloud Historian live on site. So please do come by the demo booth to review the solution and ask us any questions. And if watching after the user conference, all of our contact information is in the user conference website and application. So please do reach out with any questions, thoughts, or topics that you'd like us to explore together. So we'll close things there. Thank you once again for joining us, and hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you,
everybody.